Hey guys, tonight we slip into our sandals, throw on a toga, and take a long, confusing walk along the shores of ancient Rome. But we're not here for a beach day. Nope. You're the Emperor, and the sea has disrespected you for the last time. It's the year 39 CE, and you, yes, you, are Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus. But everyone calls you Caligula. You've got the laurel crown, the legions, and a dangerously large sense of theater. You're one of the most powerful people on Earth, and yet, you've woken up today convinced the ocean is your enemy. Yes, the ocean. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're up for it, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you all are tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes to the soft light of a Roman morning, hazy, golden, almost too calm, which is exactly the problem. The sea is calm, smug even. It laps at the shores as if it didn't just embarrass you in front of your troops. You're still seething from the failed campaign in Britain. Or maybe it never even started. Historians still argue whether you intended to invade at all or just liked parading around Gaul in full armor. Either way, your men never crossed the channel, and now you've got restless legions and nothing to show for it. So, what do? Declare war on Neptune. Yes, that Neptune, the god of the sea, the big-bearded, trident-holding immortal who rules the oceans and probably hasn't had a real enemy in centuries. Until now. Because your Caligula and logic left the building. A while ago, you summon your officers. They're expecting new orders, maybe a skirmish with Germanic tribes or a nice, straightforward massacre. Instead, you tell them, we're attacking the ocean. Silence, then a confused, tentative, "The ocean, my lord?" "Yes," you say, brushing lint off your purple robe. "The sea has insulted Rome. We will punish it." You don't elaborate. You don't need to elaborate. You're emperor. Your word is law. Your mood is weather. They nod, slowly, and shuffle away to prepare the legions for the least logical campaign in Roman history. Later that day, you mount a chariot, not for battle, but for show. Your armor gleams. Your horse snorts. Behind you, rows of soldiers march toward the shore, spears at the ready, faces a mix of confusion and grim loyalty. You reach the coast. The wind whips your cape. Waves crash like laughter at your feet. This is it. This is war. You raise your hand and gesture toward the horizon. There, the enemy. No one speaks, because no one knows what to say. You give the order, and that's where we'll stop for now, because what comes next is somehow even stranger. You stand at the edge of the known world, or at least that's how you frame it to your troops. Really, it's just a wind-blasted beach somewhere near modern-day Boulogne, the channel stretching out in front of you like a mirror to your ego. Your officers arrange themselves into neat rows behind you, sandals sinking slightly into the damp sand. The standard bearers try not to look directly at the sea. The engineers unroll ladders that were supposed to scale fortresses, now aimed, absurdly, at the surf. And your loyal soldiers? They just wait, shields braced, brows furrowed. Because today, Emperor Caligula has decided to fight Poseidon's little brother, Neptune. Or maybe the whole sea. The details aren't clear. Honestly, they never are. You step forward, raise your arm, and scream the order. Attack! The soldiers hesitate, just for a breath, but then they go. Spears fly through the air, whistling as they plunge into frothy breakers. Shields are raised against imaginary tridents. Some soldiers sprint forward with nets, and try to capture the tide. One man even charges into the shallows with a dagger between his teeth, like he's personally hunting a dolphin that once looked at him funny. A centurion shouts, "Hold formation," and the ranks stiffen. A few trample seaweed, like it owes them money. Someone stabs a jellyfish and holds it up, triumphant. You nod, gravely. War is ugly. You stand back and observe, your purple cape snapping dramatically in the sea breeze. The sun catches the gold on your chest plate just right. You look like a god surveying a conquered realm, or at least a very committed actor with a truly confusing script. Historians still argue whether this was satire, delusion, or the greatest PR stunt in Roman history. One theory suggests you were angry about the weather halting your plans to invade Britain and needed someone, or something, to blame. The sea was the easiest target. It doesn't answer back. It doesn't write counter pamphlets. It just absorbs your wrath and keeps rolling. But here's the thing. Your soldiers do it. They throw their weapons into the surf. They scream war cries at the horizon. They seize sandbars and raise victory banners made of reeds and rope. Because you told them to. Because you're emperor. And because saying no to Caligula tends to result in a shorter career and a longer visit to the underworld. Even so, there's something about this moment. It's ridiculous, but it's also electric. Absurdity has power, especially when worn with conviction. You pace the shoreline like a general in the thick of battle, every now and then pointing to a particularly large wave and calling it a warship. You instruct the engineers to build barricades out of driftwood. One of them solemnly constructs a tiny palisade using shells and seaweed. You promote him on the spot. A messenger stumbles up, out of breath, soaked from head to toe. "Report. From the southern front," he gasps. You blink. "We have a southern front?" He nods. "Yes, sire, the tide is advancing." You nod gravely. "Then we must counter-strike." You order a volley of javelins into the waves. The sea doesn't flinch, but that doesn't matter. You declare the beach secured. Now comes the spoils. You instruct your men to collect trophies from the field of victory. Seashells, pebbles, twisted bits of driftwood. One man finds a starfish and cradles it like a sacred relic. Another offers a barnacle-covered boot. You accept them all with ceremonial seriousness, because this is not just a campaign. This is a lesson. To whom? You're not sure. Neptune, maybe. Or Rome. Or the voices in your head that keep suggesting increasingly theatrical policies. Doesn't matter. The sun begins to dip. The soldiers stand at attention, soaked and salty, holding their loot in wicker baskets. You raise your hand once more and shout, "Roma Victa!" And they cheer. Oh, how they cheer. Because what else can they do? Back in Rome, they'll say you defeated the sea, that you went to the edge of the empire and returned not with prisoners, but with proof that not even nature dares oppose you. And, that might actually play. Because in Rome, truth is whatever the emperor says loudest. Even if it's this. The sun hangs low now, casting long shadows behind your victorious legions as they trudge up the dunes, soaked to the knees and wondering whether the entire day was some elaborate hazing ritual. But you're energized, euphoric, alive, in a way that only comes after declaring war on the ocean and, technically, winning. You call for your scribe. He appears, sandals flapping, scroll in hand. "Write this down," you say, sweeping your arm wide to indicate the entire coastline. Here, upon the shore of the world, Caesar Caligula triumphed over Neptune, Lord of Waters. The scribe hesitates for half a heartbeat, long enough for you to raise an eyebrow, then nods and begins scratching ink across parchment. You glance at him. "And make sure you get the part about the spoils." "Which spoils, my lord?" You gesture to a pile of seashells. He nods again, writes faster, and just like that, history is edited in real time. Now comes the part you enjoy most: celebration. You order the troops to arrange the baskets of shells and pebbles into neat formations on the beach. Some unlucky lads are told to stack them into tiny pyramids. Trophy mounds, you call them. The standard bearers jab their poles into the wet sand like victory markers. It's a cross between a battlefield and a seaside picnic, if the picnic had 3,000 confused legionaries pretending they just conquered Atlantis. Then comes the showstopper. You order the horns to sound, the big ones, the curved bronze instruments, usually reserved for victory parades or terrifying elephants. They blare across the beach like an angry foghorn choir. Gulls scatter. A donkey, tied to a cart full of clams, faints. It's glorious. You climb onto a hastily built dais of driftwood and begin addressing your men. Soldiers of Rome, today you have struck a blow not just for empire but for dignity. Neptune, humbled, the tide, tamed, the foam, defeated. The men cheer, loudly. Some even bang their swords against their shields, not out of passion but because it's getting cold and they want this speech to end so they can build fires. You lift one of the spoils, a palm-sized scallop shell, glistening with seawater, and hold it high. This, you declare, is proof of our conquest. A pause, then a thunderous, obedient roar of applause, because once again, you're emperor, and nobody wants to be the first guy to laugh. Well, almost nobody. Off to the side, one centurion, one of the old ones with a crooked nose and zero tolerance for nonsense, leans toward his fellow officer and mutters, "Should have just waited for low tide." Your scribe catches it, doesn't write it down. Smart lad. Back at the encampment, you issue new commands. Every soldier must take home a handful of the enemy's remains. Bags of shells are handed out. Some get crabs. Some get slimy kelp. One poor soul ends up carrying a jellyfish in a jar all the way back to Rome. You dub it Medusae Triumphalis and insist it be given a small shrine. The real trophy, however, is yours. You instruct your guards to haul in several large crates of sand. Yes, sand, and have them sealed with wax and stamped with your personal seal. These, you explain, are to be displayed in the Forum upon your return. War trophies, evidence of your brilliant campaign. Historians still argue whether this was all part of a larger plan to distract from your failed British invasion, or if it was just you enjoying your unchecked ability to reshape reality. Either way, you're not done. No, now you plan the triumph, and not just any triumph, a full military parade through the streets of Rome to celebrate your victory over the sea. You pace your tent, robes flowing, eyes bright with ideas. You summon engineers and parade coordinators. "I want floats," you say. "Big ones, with seahorses and tridents, and at least one giant clam that opens dramatically when I pass." The planners nod. They've worked with worse. You pause. Oh, and dress the dancers like nereids. Someone dares to ask, "What's a nereid?" You wave a dismissive hand. Doesn't matter. Make it sparkly. Because this isn't about fact. This is about theater. The next morning, as the men break camp and load the wagons, you gaze back at the ocean. It still rolls in, lazy and unbothered. But in your mind, it's bowed in submission. You smile, brush the salt from your cloak, and whisper, "Let that be a lesson." A seagull poops. Nearby, close enough. You return to Rome in full regalia, sun-kissed from the northern coast, humming triumphantly under your breath as your gilded chariot creaks through the city gates. The crowd has gathered, not for the usual reasons, not for gladiators or grain, but because you've declared the impossible. You beat the sea, and now it's time to celebrate. The Forum is draped in banners of deep blue and seafoam green, embroidered with gold thread waves and stylized fish. Sculptors have been working overtime to carve trident-bearing mermen into the bases of fountains. One clever artisan even constructs a statue of you riding a seahorse. It's part heroic, part unsettling. You don't mind. You love it. Today is your triumph, the greatest honor in the Roman world, and while traditionally reserved for victories over human foes, you've made it clear that Neptune counts. Your reasoning? He started it. The Senate, of course, is confused, but they're also terrified of you. So they approve the parade route, grant you the title Neptunus Victor, and order all temples to ring their bells when you pass. Even the ones devoted to, the sea gods, deliciously ironic. The people? They're more amused than anything. Some buy into the performance, others whisper jokes in back alleys. But when your legions begin marching, armor polished, shells tied to their belts like trophies, they all cheer because Rome loves a show. And you, Caligula, know exactly how to deliver one. The parade begins with dancers dressed as Nereids and Tritons, flowing scarves trailing behind them like sea foam. Then come the captives, bored-looking soldiers in fish masks, shackled, with seaweed garlands. One stumbles. The crowd laughs. You wave magnanimously from your chariot, pulled by 4 white horses with little fins sewn onto their harnesses. Behind you, carts rattle with crates of ocean loot. Coral, sand jars, crab shells, even a few buckets of salt water. The Roman people line the streets, squinting at it all. Someone leans over and mutters, "Did Neptune really sign the peace treaty?" Someone else replies, "Only after we took his starfish hostage." You can feel the laughter underneath the cheers, but that's fine. It's part of the plan. Because this isn't just a mock war, it's a test, a game of how far reality can bend around your will. And right now, it's bending beautifully. At the Capitoline Hill, you step down from your chariot and ascend the steps in silence, carrying a conch shell wrapped in purple velvet. With great ceremony, you present it to the priests. "An offering," you say, "from a humbled sea." They blink, then nod. Of course they do. They've already seen worse. Historians still argue whether this entire triumph was a satire, an insult, or a coping mechanism for military failure. Some say you were mocking Rome's obsession with conquest. Others say you were losing your grip. A minority suggests you were secretly an avant-garde philosopher performing conceptual theater no one understood, including you. Whatever the case, the public is talking. And in Rome, that's as good as gold. At the post-parade banquet, you dine beneath seaweed garlands while musicians play flutes carved from driftwood. You wear a robe the color of twilight surf, and instead of a laurel crown, you don a circlet of oyster shells dipped in bronze. "Drink!" you shout, lifting your goblet of diluted wine. To Neptune, beaten at last, someone hiccups. A senator drops a shrimp into his toga, and you lean back, satisfied. You've pulled it off. You've made the city forget, if only briefly, that nothing actually happened. That there was no invasion, no conquest, no enemy army, just wind, water, and your determination to wrangle it into legend. This is your greatest trick, not defeating Britain, not expanding the empire, but making an entire empire believe it triumphed over the sea. And believe it did. Children run through the streets pretending to battle waves. Poets write odes to your maritime campaign. One street vendor starts selling Caligula's salted victory fish. They're just dried sardines. But they sell out. You, of course, take a cut, because if you're going to be the madman emperor, you might as well be profitable. The days after your aquatic conquest take on a dreamy, almost theatrical rhythm. Rome hums with gossip, garlanded with sea motifs, and you, Caligula, drift through it like a deity from a bizarre myth. You've become part emperor, part performance, artist, and part unhinged carnival barker. And the people. They can't look away. You start appearing in public dressed in robes dyed seafoam green, with gold-stitched barnacle patterns and sandals bejeweled with polished clam shells. Your hair? curls lightly dusted with powdered lapis lazuli. Ocean dust, as you call it. You even have a small conch shell tied to your belt, which you occasionally blow into during Senate sessions. It makes a noise like a wounded duck, but no one dares comment. You've decided to double down. The war against Neptune is over, sure, but the cultural campaign, just getting started. You order temples to create small shrines to Neptune's submission. Inside, tiny model ships snapped in half, sculpted sea monsters bound in chains, and you, always you, triumphing above them with one sandal planted. On a wave. Some statues even include exaggerated muscles and a fluttering cape. Historians still argue whether those were your idea or the sculptor's. A few suspect both. You rename a section of the form the Maritimus Quadrant, hangnets, and shells from the columns, and commission a mural of yourself throwing thunderbolts into a stormy sea. Never mind that Neptune uses a trident, not lightning. You've never been one for minor details. But perhaps your boldest move is the creation of the Sea Triumph Festival, a week-long celebration held every year to commemorate your victory. Events include shell-painting contests, dramatic reenactments of the beach battle, complete with wooden swords and foam waves, and, your favorite, the sea chariot races. The chariots are ordinary, but they're fitted with fish-scale decals, and the horses wear painted cardboard fins on their sides. Spectators line the track waving seaweed fronds and chanting, "Aqua! Aqua! Av Caligula!" It's ridiculous, it's glorious, and it works. People forget the British campaign that never was. They forget the logistics failures, the overextended legions, the senators grumbling in wine-stained whispers, because the only thing they remember now is you, arms outstretched, facing the waves like a sunburned Poseidon. One senator tries to raise concerns about the treasury. The state can't afford weekly aquatic processions, he argues. You respond by ordering him to serve as official wave greeter during the next reenactment. He stands on the shoreline in a too-tight fish costume for 6 hours, solemnly, saluting each wave, never complains again. But it's not all show. You start quietly pushing legislation, real laws, while everyone's distracted. Tax reforms, military reallocations, even a land survey initiative. All couched in aquatic metaphors. Fishing the Truth Act, the Deep Levy, the Riverine Census. And here's the twist. Some of them are actually effective. Scholars later speculate that the sea victory served as a kind of smokescreen, a spectacular distraction while you consolidated real power behind the curtain. Others believe you genuinely thought the sea was your enemy and the laws were just happy accidents. Either way, Rome changes. The people are laughing, the nobles are watching, and you're already planning your next masterpiece. At night, you sit in your sea-themed palace wing, walls painted with waves, ceilings spangled with starfish mosaics, and sip chilled wine from a cup shaped like a scallop. The air smells faintly of salt and rosewater. A servant fans you with a dried eel's skin. It's absurd. It's perfect. You recline, content, and whisper, "Next time, maybe I'll conquer the moon." A scribe nearby looks up sharply. You smile. Don't write that down. You don't conquer the moon, yet, but the idea sits with you, glows softly in the back of your mind like a coin tossed into a deep well. In the meantime, you continue reshaping Rome with all the theatrical flair of a playwright who happens to command an empire. You start with the Senate. By now, they've grown wary of your flair for symbolism, your flair for salt water. One senator whispers that your next triumph will be in honor of a successfully boiled egg. Another mutters something about Neptune hiring lawyers, so naturally you double down again. You install a massive aquarium behind the Senate dais. Not subtle. It's stocked with bright fish, murky eels, and one very angry-looking octopus that seems to glare specifically at your political enemies. You call him Consul Tentaculus. Your guards don't laugh. They're not sure they're supposed to. During debates, you turn your back on the humans and address the fish. What say you, O creatures of the deep, you ask? Shall Rome levy taxes on olive oil or not? Then you nod sagely. The eels abstain. Motion carried. You reassign a handful of senators to positions in the newly created Ministry of Marine Conquest, its sole duty, manage the post-war reconstruction of the sea. Responsibilities include counting tide pools and preparing a census of crustaceans. The position comes with a seashell crown and a mandatory robe dyed in octopus. Ink, again, utterly ridiculous. And yet Rome keeps moving. The people, who would normally rebel against excessive taxation or military losses, are too busy attending Neptune festivals and buying blue-themed pastries from roadside vendors. C-shaped cookies, trident lollipops, fried seaweed. You taste one once, spit it out. Ban that one, you mutter. Your bakers comply immediately, and as all this unfolds, word of your campaign spreads beyond the city walls. Envoys from distant provinces send curious letters. Did he really attack the sea? Some laugh, some panic. A few write back with ambitious proposals. One offers to invade a lake in your honor. Another suggests burning incense toward the direction of the Adriatic. You nod approvingly. Begin. Drawing borders, you say? We'll need to establish embassies beneath the waves. Your cartographers blink, then get to work, sketching crude diagrams of seafloor towns and dolphin-run postal services. Historians still argue whether this was parody, madness, or political genius. Some say you knew Rome's morale was collapsing and invented a divine enemy to rally it. Others claim you simply wanted to see how far reality would bend before it snapped. Either way, it doesn't snap. It just ripples, and people go along with it, like the merchant who names his shop Victory Over Salt Ink, or the mosaic artist who depicts you shaking hands with a squid. You reward both men with tax exemptions and a private performance from the imperial flute players. Back at your palace, your private quarters undergo renovations. You demand that your sleeping chamber resemble the interior of a clamshell. A massive one, painted pink, inlaid with pearls, with silken sheets dyed the color of sea mist. You begin sleeping at odd angles, curled like a shrimp. The royal physician says nothing, but you catch him muttering to the palace cat. Even your dreams are watery now. You dream of wave chariots pulled by seahorses, of sunken temples where your bust stands tall and barnacle-free. You dream of sirens that don't sing, but instead deliver stirring orations about imperial reform. One night you wake suddenly. Jot something down. The next morning, you present a new decree. All citizens are henceforth advised to speak kindly of puddles. You explain that even the smallest pool might be a sacred envoy of Neptune, watching, waiting, assessing our worthiness. The law passes, of course, with applause, even from the puddles. Or so you claim. You've always loved a spectacle, but now the lines between performance and governance are dissolving entirely. Your empire doesn't just march to your orders, it dances to your imagination. Your next project, the Temple of the Tamed Sea. You order it to be built right in the heart of Rome, between the Temple of Jupiter and the public baths, just to really make a statement. It's to be circular, like the sun, like eternity, like a drop of water hitting, still marble. The roof, open to the sky. The walls, lined with wave-like mosaics and columns shaped like curling sea serpents. Inside, instead of altars, you place massive glass tanks filled with exotic marine life. Some glow. Some float aimlessly. One spits water at visiting senators. You pretend not to notice. You decree that once a week, all citizens are invited to visit and listen for messages from Neptune. What they're supposed to hear, you never say. But people come anyway. Some lean in close to the tanks. Others just want to glimpse the legendary octopus, Consul Tentaculus, whom you've elevated to High Priest of the Sea's regret. You build a throne in the back, raised above the tanks, for your personal use. It's carved from driftwood and inlaid with shells shaped like your face. You call it the Aqua Seat. You sit there, legs crossed, waving to passers-by like a pontiff of puddles. Historians still argue whether the temple was a parody of Roman religious architecture, a sincere spiritual vision, or simply your way of building an aquarium without technically calling it an aquarium. Either way, the temple draws thousands. It's cooler than the forums, less crowded than the circus, and, as one visitor mutters, less bloody than the Colosseum. One evening, you invite the Senate to a moonlit ceremony at the temple. They're expecting more antics, maybe another conch-blowing contest. Instead, you deliver a speech. But not just any speech. You call it the Treaty of the Tides. In it, you announce that you are no longer merely Emperor of Rome, but also Ambassador to the Oceans. You claim to have received personal correspondence from Neptune via a series of dreams, a curious fishbone arrangement, and the sound of waves lapping in a cup. The letter, as you read it aloud, thanks Rome for its mercy, for sparing the sea's life. It pledges loyalty, offers kelp-based trade agreements, and closes with, "Ever yours, Poseidon, Grand Admiral of the Deep." You finish the speech with a deep bow and hand a sealed scroll to a senator. "Keep that safe." You whisper. It may be the only surviving copy. He nods wide-eyed, tucks it into his toga. You can tell he's trying to decide if you're serious. So are the historians. Was this an elaborate joke, a diplomatic decoy, an art piece gone feral, a form of governance as hallucination? And yet, as ridiculous as it is, you've created something remarkable. The temple becomes a destination. Artists paint murals of you striking deals with tridents. Poets write hymns to the new era of aqua politics. Children splash in fountains pretending to debate sea turtles about tariffs. You've turned a city of stone into a city of stories, and you, Caligula, are both author and protagonist. One afternoon, reclining on your aqua seat, you mutter to a nearby servant, "What if we offered citizenship to whales?" He hesitates, then bows. "I'll draw up the paperwork, Imperator." You smile. This is what power feels like. Waves, after all, aren't ruled with swords. They're ruled with ripples. You don't stop at temples or titles. No, you have one more ripple to cast, one final grand gesture in your slow, glimmering tsunami of absurd majesty. You build a lighthouse. Not just any lighthouse. A beacon to mark the sea's surrender. It stands, tall at the edge of Ostia, where the Tiber meets the sea, your old battlefield. You order it clad in white marble spiraling like a conch shell, with gold-veined panels that catch the sun at dawn. On top, instead of the usual brazier or lantern, you place a statue of yourself, arms outstretched, one hand holding a scroll, the other a tiny carved wave. In the scroll hand, a plaque reads, "Thus ends the tide of defiance." Some think it's poetic. Others say it's terrifying. But none deny it's unforgettable. You also install a mechanical dolphin at the base of the lighthouse. It doesn't work very well, it sort of flops in the wind, but you insist it stays. Symbolism, you say. No one argues. At the inauguration ceremony, you wear a toga embroidered with pearls and a wreath made of twisted seaweed. You stand atop a chariot pulled by 4 white horses painted blue. It takes hours to scrub the dye out later, but the visual impact is worth it. As the sun sets behind your beacon, you deliver another speech, this time shorter, softer. You talk about tides, about fate, about the thin line between fear and reverence. And you say, in the sort of dreamy murmur usually reserved for oracles, "When we fight what we cannot grasp, we win not by conquest, but by naming it ours." The crowd doesn't fully understand, but they cheer anyway. And in the hush that follows, you whisper to yourself, "We named the sea, and now it belongs to us." Historians still argue whether you believed any of this. Some say you were lost in your own metaphors, a monarch drifting on the tide of ego. Others argue it was all deliberate, a slow-cooked psychological operation meant to realign Rome's fractured narrative. Make yourself unforgettable. Disrupt the cynicism with theater. But here's a truth they all agree on. It worked. The sea war becomes myth. Coins are minted with dolphins and your face. Shops open up with names like Triton and Sons and The Moist Laurel. Popular children's game involves splashing in fountains and reenacting your victory, complete with shouted Latin insults at passing pigeons. And through it all, you keep smiling, not the strained, dangerous grin of a madman, but the small, private smirk of someone who knows they've pulled off the greatest prank in imperial history and gotten away with it. You've taken a potential political disaster and turned it into public art. You've made the impossible seem inevitable. You've weaponized whimsy. Back at your palace, you begin sketching plans for a new monument, a theater carved entirely from coral, you say. Or at least painted like coral, your architect gently replies. You nod, and somewhere behind your eyes, another wave curls upward, waiting to break. One morning, you awaken to the scent of salt and citrus. Not unusual, you've had lemon trees imported, and the palace fountains now bubble with briny perfume. But today the scent feels heavier. You rise, step onto the balcony, and gaze toward the west. The sea glints in the distance, silver and smug, as if watching you back. You whisper, "Good morning, old friend." You mean it, because this entire strange dance, this war without blood, this treaty without ink, it's never really been about victory. It's been about presence, yours and the sea's. Two vast forces, equally unknowable, locked in a silent contest of symbolism. Your advisors have stopped asking questions. When you suggest commissioning a mural of Poseidon shaking your hand while holding a Roman tax scroll, they just nod. When you recommend all civic fountains be adjusted to face west, toward our eternal watery witness, they start marking measurements, and yet a whisper begins to rise, a note of resistance in the air. The senators, always slow to anger, are beginning to wrinkle their brows in something dangerously close to doubt. Some now arrive late to your Neptune ceremonies. Others murmur during your speeches. One accidentally refers to you as his dampness, within earshot. You don't punish him. You don't need to. Because the real punishment is this. They're forgetting the joy, the laughter, the lightness. You can feel it, and that's what worries. You try to rekindle the magic. You stage a parade of jellyfish-shaped kites down the Via Sacra. You draft a bill to rename all months after marine creatures, Septembrime, Octopober, Squidvember. You even deliver a midnight poem to the Tiber itself, kneeling beside the water, your reflection trembling like an emperor-shaped question mark. Still, the tide is turning. Historians still argue whether this phase marked a descent into madness, or a deepening awareness that your grip was slipping. Some say you began to feel like a guest in your own fantasy, that you sense the stories growing stale, but you don't stop. You do what you always do. You go bigger. You order a floating stage constructed on the surface of Lake Nemi, a massive wooden platform shaped like a nautilus shell, lacquered and inlaid with mother of pearl. It's to host the first Imperial Nautical Symposium, a week-long festival of oration, comedy, and military planning conducted entirely on water. Only 2 senators fall in. You call it a success. On the final night, you wear a cape that drapes like sea foam and perform your own monologue titled Salt, Sovereignty, and the Soul. It's a blend of confession, philosophy, and light ventriloquism using a conch shell. The crowd doesn't quite get it, but they applaud. Politely, tiredly. You step off the floating stage, suddenly aware of your sandals squelching with lake water, of the lanterns guttering in the mist, of the distant owls who do not care one whit for diplomacy with Poseidon, and for the first time, you wonder, what if the sea never took this seriously? What if it just watched, smiled, let you have your fun, and then went on being what it always was, wild, endless, and utterly beyond control? You stand alone on the pier, wind flapping your cape, the lighthouse glinting faintly on the horizon like a joke whispered too late. By now, Rome has started to forget the beginning of it all. The sand-filled helmets, the shouting at waves, the line of soldiers capturing seashells with solemn determination. It's fading into legend, or maybe satire. The kind of thing barbers tell kids to make them laugh while trimming their hair. But you, Caligula, you remember everything. You remember the feel of the wet hem on your imperial robe after your first shore assault, the squeak of sandals on drenched marble, the look on your general's face when you handed him a starfish and called it a war medal. These memories don't haunt you. They warm you, but warmth, like tides, always ebbs. And now, the murmurs of dissatisfaction are growing. The Senate avoids. Your eyes. The palace staff flinches when you speak too softly. Even the dolphins at your Temple of the Tamed Sea seem to swim slower, either out of boredom or intuition. You respond the only way you know how, by elevating the absurd. You commission a new kind of ship, a massive barge-like vessel adorned with pink marble, golden figureheads, and embroidered silk sails. It is to be called the Sovereign Sponge, and its purpose, a perpetual voyage along the Italian coast where, according to your decree, it will soak up sea crimes and purify the waters. You appoint a captain, a man with one eye and no sense of humor. You hire a crew trained not in navigation, but in interpretive dance. Every time the ship docks, they perform a pantomime of Poseidon offering tribute to Rome. You watch these performances from a velvet chair carried to the shore by shirtless scribes. Meanwhile, your enemies gather like barnacles on the hull of your reign. Some whisper of madness. Others speak of replacement. A few, bold, perhaps foolish, send coded letters to potential successors. Historians still argue whether you noticed, but let's be honest. You noticed everything. You just didn't care. Because in your mind, none of it mattered. Not the whispers, not the plotting, not even the slow erosion of loyalty. All that mattered was the story, the myth you were weaving, and in that myth, you weren't a failing emperor, you were a celestial diplomat, a tide whisperer, a man who dared to declare dominion over the unrulable. One night, in the rose-lit chambers of your palace, you stare into a shallow bowl of seawater. Inside, a few flecks of sand swirl lazily, like tiny planets in orbit. You dip a finger in, stir gently. The ripples go nowhere. Still, you nod. Satisfied, you summon a messenger. "Tell the Senate," you say softly, "that I have appointed a new consul." You pause. His name is Foam. The messenger stares, then nods, then runs. So now Rome has a new consul. Or, well, a shallow bowl of bubbles. You position it in the Senate chamber on a marble pedestal, flanked by 2 solemn guards in fish-scale armor. A bronze plaque below reads simply, "Foam, Guardian of the Coastal. Edicts." At first, it's a joke, a nervous one. Senators chuckle, glance at one another, and whisper, "Surely this will pass." But days stretch into weeks. You insist every Senate decree be co-signed by foam. You dip your hand into the bowl before every announcement. You consult it before war councils. Once, when asked about a drought in Gaul, you stare into the water for a full 5 minutes before solemnly announcing, "Foam wishes for more aqueducts." The chamber grows very, very quiet. Still, no one defies you, because how do you argue with foam? Historians still argue whether this was your ultimate act of satire, one long joke at the expense of bureaucracy, or a final step into something else, something deeper, a personal myth that swallowed the man whole. But whatever it was, it kept Rome on its toes. The city's fountains now burble with ceremonial flair. Statues of Neptune are slowly replaced by newer ones, taller, sleeker, with more resemblance to, well, you. Temples ring seashells like halos around altars. You even host a birthday party for foam, complete with harp music, spiced wine, and a 5-course seafood banquet nobody finishes. One brave senator mutters that it feels wrong to serve oysters at foam's celebration. You reply, they were spies. No one laughs. No one breathes. Later, you order miniature marble bathtubs to be installed in every governor's villa. So they may confer with the coastal spirit, you write, even inland. The inland provinces do not appreciate this. But you're past caring. You found something better than policy. You found symbolism. Symbols never contradict you. They never resist. They shimmer and echo and bloom into legend. And as long as people repeat your words, even in mockery, they carry your myth forward. That's power. Real, strange, salty power. And now you want more. So you make plans for foam's temple, not a small shrine, a grand basilica. Circular. No roof. A central pool open to the sky. Sunlight pouring in like holy wine. Every surface carved with wave patterns. The columns twist like whirlpools. The ceiling, where it exists, painted with sea serpents in prayer. You choose a location near the old. Baths. You say it's symbolic, cleansing, restorative. Your architect does not question you. You call it the Basilica of the Watery Council, and by Jupiter, you mean it. At the groundbreaking ceremony, you wear a silver mask shaped like a cresting. Wave. You don't speak. You let the silence carry your intent. Someone sneezes. They are quietly reassigned to Thrace. Later that night, you sit beside foam, your finger tracing lazy circles in the water. "I think they're starting to understand," you whisper. The bubbles pop softly in reply. The Basilica of the Watery Council rises, slowly, absurdly, gloriously. Each day you walk among its scaffolding like a tide inspecting its shore. Laborers bow, priests bow, even the architects bow. You don't tell them to, it just seems expected. Now, the pool at the center, foam's sacred seat, is shaped like a spiral galaxy, the kind no Roman has ever seen. You describe it in a dream to your mosaicists, who spend a week trying to make sense of your sketch. A swirl of dots, a fish, and what might be your signature, or might be a jellyfish. They figure it out. The tiles shimmer like stars sunk beneath. Waves, blue glass, lapis lazuli, flecks of real gold, because if foam is eternal, he deserves a bit of sparkle. Outside the temple, people begin leaving offerings. Not just fishermen or sailors, but politicians, shopkeepers, even gladiators. Seashell necklaces, tiny model triremes, scrolls of apology. One man leaves a live crab tied with a red ribbon. It escapes. You call it a sign. Inside the Senate, things are delicate. You still hold sessions, still pass laws, but all decrees must be read first at the Basilica pool. If the bubbles ripple favorably, the motion passes. If they do not, well, no one really argues. Not anymore. Historians still Argue whether this was performance or delusion, whether you had become high priest of a personal cult or simply understood, better than anyone, that politics is a play, and you were its playwright, actor, and divine audience. But what cannot be debated is the effect. Rome begins to shift. Sailors, chant your name before boarding. Children skip stones and say, "This one's for Caligula." A rumor spreads that foam once saved a merchant ship from wreckage. No one can prove it. No one needs to. You lean into this myth-making with glee. You release a set of state-approved sea shanties. You rename the western ports with aquatic puns. You order the equestrian statues in the Forum to wear barnacle-patterned armor, and you keep expanding foam's empire. You announce the construction of shrines along the coast. Small domes with open roofs, sea basins at their centers, and little carved chairs where locals can listen to the tides of governance. The provinces roll their eyes, but then the drought ends. Rain falls for weeks. Crops surge. A fisherman claims foam spoke to him in bubbles and led him to a hidden shoal. He's rich by the end of the season. Suddenly the provinces aren't rolling their eyes. They're building their own pools. And then you pause. Not because you're tired, because you're satisfied. You've done it. You've turned and invented. War into a living religion. A weird ceremony into national identity. A bowl of water into statecraft. You sit beside foam one evening, cloaked in a robe stitched with pearls and tiny bells. They jingle softly as you lean in. Do you think they'll remember? You ask the pool. The ripples nod. Of course they will. Time rolls forward like a tide, dragging memory with it, and you, Caligula, begin to sense that tide shifting once again. It starts in whispers. Not in the Senate or among your palace staff, they're too well trained for whispers, but in the markets, the baths, the little bakeries tucked behind marble columns. People start making foam jokes. Harmless at first, little puns, fishy metaphors. Someone bakes a loaf of bread shaped like a splash and calls it consul crumb. You laugh, quietly, at first, but then there's a statue, not of you, of foam. It appears overnight near the docks. A fisherman's prank, maybe, or a poet's. It shows the sacred bowl with cartoonish eyes and a smirking mouth balancing a crown of seaweed. You don't destroy it. You promote it because you understand something they don't. Ridicule doesn't shrink a myth. It spreads it. Historians still argue whether this was an act of profound genius or wild desperation, whether you wanted to preserve your symbol or had simply become too entangled in it to tell the difference. But no one can argue with the results. Foam is everywhere now. The Senate issues decrees in its name. The Navy sails under its blessing. Brides carry little bowls of water down the aisle. Children blow bubbles during festivals and shout, "Long live the consul!" And deep down, you know, this is your immortality. Still, you can feel the cracks. Your allies are nervous. Your generals grumble. The treasury is low. The real threats aren't coming from Neptune or the spray of the Adriatic. They're coming from behind marble doors and shadowy meetings in perfumed villas. So, you prepare. Not a war, not a purge, a performance. You plan the grand ritual of confluence. One final ceremony to bind Rome and the sea forever. You choose the harbor of Ostia as the stage. You commission hundreds of silk banners shaped like sea creatures. You order an artificial tide machine, an enormous bronze wheel turned by slaves to create crashing waves on command. The entire Senate is invited. So are the priests, the merchants, the ambassadors from lands you barely recognize. The people gather in the thousands. You descend the steps in robes of wet-look linen, silver circlet glinting like frost on a clam shell. At your side, foam, nestled in its golden cradle, escorted by guards with seahorse crests on their helmets. The sun sets. Trumpets blare. You raise your arms. You declare Rome and the sea eternally unified, that there shall be no tide that does not carry Roman law, no wave that does not speak your name. The artificial tide crashes. People cheer. Fireworks burst overhead in blue and green, and for a moment, for one glorious, ridiculous, unforgettable moment, you believe it all, you and foam, emperor and god, man and myth. The ocean responds not with thunder, but with a hush, as if listening. And then, as always with Rome, the silence ends in whispers. They begin after the ritual. Nothing dramatic. No thunderous rebellion. Just an increasing quiet in the corridors of power. A growing reluctance in the eyes of guards who once stood straighter at your passing. A senator coughs and doesn't bow. A priest hesitates before pouring libation at foam's altar. You still hold your daily audiences with foam, sometimes in silence, sometimes in elaborate dialogue only you can hear. You still sign decrees with a drop of seawater, but now it feels thinner, like the tide pulling back before a wave. Back in the palace, the marble begins to crack. Literally, a hairline fracture down the side of your atrium wall becomes a topic of whispered fascination. Superstition floods the air like incense. "A sign," they mutter. The consul is leaking. You overhear it once. You don't respond. Because here's the truth. You've always known this couldn't last. Not because it was too strange or too expensive or too mocked, but because Rome never lets anything last. Not dreams, not rituals, not even gods. Historians still argue whether this realization broke you or freed you, but in your quietest hours, those late evenings when the moon hangs like a silver coin over the Tiber, you start talking to the water differently. Less like a god, more like a friend. Do you think they ever truly believed? You ask foam. The ripples reply, but of course they say nothing. So you begin writing, not laws, not decrees. Stories. You compose a full chronicle of your war against the sea. You describe every ceremony, every outfit, every invented ritual, with scholarly seriousness and footnotes only you understand. You commission artists to paint vast murals, triumphs of tide and shell, of foam's rise to consulship, of your declaration to Poseidon. Some are grand, others weirdly adorable. One shows foam in a toga holding a scroll. You laugh at that one, and you leave instructions that the Basilica of the Watery Council is never to be torn down, even if Rome forgets its purpose, and it will. You know it will, but something always lingers. Bowl in a museum, a footnote in a dusty scroll, a child skipping a stone and whispering your name, not knowing why, because myths never disappear. They just recede, waiting for the next tide. You walk the halls of your palace one night, alone except for the soft patter of sandals echoing like waves. You pause before foam, its surface still and golden under torchlight, and you nod, as if to say, this has been enough, not for power, not for glory, but for story. The sun rises on what will be your final ritual. You know it, though no one's told you. There's something in the air, heavy, quiet, like the stillness before a summer storm. Rome is awake, but not alive. Streets that once buzzed with curiosity about your aquatic ambitions now seem to hold their breath. You dress slowly. No shimmering robes today. No garlands of kelp. No circlets of coral. Just a white tunic, simple and clean, tied with a rope belt. You leave the silver mask behind. You carry foam in your own arms. Not on a litter. Not in a gilded frame. Just you and the bowl. And Rome, the basilica of the watery council glows in the morning light, its stones warm, its spiral pool still gleaming. You walk the colonnade alone. Your footsteps echo in a way that makes you feel either like a god or a ghost. You can't decide which. Inside, the pool reflects the sky. You kneel before it, and for the first time in years, you don't say anything. You don't need to. You lower the bowl gently into the center of the spiral and let it float. Foam's final. Resting place, bobbing lightly in the water like a crown set adrift. Historians still argue what happened next. Some say a servant found you sitting there hours later, head bowed, utterly still. Others claim you gave a final speech to the Senate, full of riddles and water metaphors, and walked into the sea yourself, vanishing like a tide-bound legend. One chronicle insists foam overflowed, spilled onto the marble floor, and turned into a fish that wriggled its way into the Tiber. All of them agree on one thing, that the temple was sealed, not destroyed, just closed, bricked up, left to the pigeons and time, and inside, the bowl remains. Centuries pass, empires fall, the myths fade. But sometimes a traveler wandering the ruins of old Ostia swears they hear the sound of lapping waves behind the old stone, or the faint pop of a bubble. And maybe, if the light is right, they catch a glimpse of something round and shimmering, resting in the shadows. Foam, the consul who never ruled and always ruled. Your name lives on, half punchline, half miracle, fully remembered. You declared war on the sea, and somehow you won. And now, as the echoes of sandals fade and the marble halls quiet down, let yourself sink into that same hush that blanketed ancient Rome one strange morning. Let your breath slow, like ripples settling on a still pool. No need for crowns or banners or ceremonies now, just soft shadows curling through temple ruins and the memory of water whispering to stone. Picture it, the wind passing through broken columns, gently stirring bits of dust that once danced, around philosophers, soldiers, dreamers. High above, the stars blink softly, unchanged by time, the same ones that watched you build cities from bubbles and declare loyalty to something that could never speak back, but always listened. Let the waves inside you smooth out. Let the questions fade. Was it madness or genius, satire or worship? It doesn't matter now. The story was told, the dream was dreamed, and the sea, whether real or imagined, answered you in kind. You can rest now. The myth is whole. Just the sound of your breath, the hush of surf that isn't there, and the faintest glimmer of foam on the edge of sleep. Good night, Consul. Sleep well.